Welcome to the Canadian Institute of Forestry's National Electronic Lecture Program. My name is Sharon Yang, and I will be hosting today's session. Today is Tuesday, March 17th, 2026, and this is the seventh session in the e-lecture series entitled Applied Research Perspectives Across the Canadian Forest Service. The series is a collaborative effort coordinated between the Canadian Forest Service and the Canadian Council of Forest Ministers. The CIF-IFC is very pleased to collaborate and host these webinars. For today's session, we are pleased to welcome Charlotte Norris, who will present Linking Forest Degradation, Soil Health, and Soil Security, Insights from Recent CFS Research. To begin, Dr. Charlotte Norris is a forest soil research scientist with Natural Resources Canada, where she studies soil security and the impacts of human activities on forest soil health. She was previously the Canadian lead project scientist for the Soil Health Institute's North American project to evaluate soil health measurements. She has conducted research investigating indicators of soil quality in reclaimed forest ecosystems, examining the effects of forest harvesting practices on soil quality and assessing measurements used to detect changes in soil health from agricultural measurement. Her current research focuses on developing measurements to detect changes in forest soil condition. Dr. Norris holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from the University of Victoria and earned both her Master of Science and PhD in Soil Science from the University of Alberta. She is also a registered professional agrologist. With that, I will now pass it over to Charlotte to begin today's presentation.
Hi, Sharon. Thanks for the introduction. The title is Linking Forest Soil Degradation, Soil Health, Soil Security, Big Ideas. And I just want to add a little caveat or maybe even apology, which I shouldn't say. If you're looking for data and you're an adult, there's not going to be much in this presentation. So I'm sorry for that. Tune in about 2 to 5 years, and we should have a lot more for you. It's going to be a lot more about sort of ideas and concepts in relation to forest soils. So I've been in some talks recently where people have talked about place and perspective, and it's resonated with me how where you are influences your perspective, and it's just something I've been thinking about. And I recognized on this national call that people could be tuning in from Kamloops and the beautiful Doug fir stands that are just outside the city there. Or maybe you're calling in from some gorgeous old growth stands in Nova Scotia. Then we've got, maybe you're coming from outside Thunder Bay in the mixed woods outside the region there. Or maybe outside Edmonton and Edson, Alberta, and you can see the Rocky Mountains in the distance. And so we call all of these forest systems, but we also all recognize that they're a little bit different. And so I think that's really an interesting point. And so this has been ongoing in some conversations recently. And then also a colleague of mine working on this project came to visit. He's based in Saskatchewan. And when I think of Saskatchewan, I think of the stands that I visited there, some old jack pine stands. And so to him, certainly that is what a tree stand looks like. But we had the opportunity to take him out to Port Renfrew on the west coast here and show him some other stands and look at some other trees. And it really shifted his perspective of what a forest could look like. So I find it really interesting to think about that when we talk about a forest. Where are we coming from? What's our perspective? And I think that's been part of Yeah, but what I've been thinking about, because my perspective is shaped by where I grew up, which was a region of fisheries, farming, and forestry. And it was a diverse in the landscape. We had conifer stands, we had deciduous stands, and there's a lot of diversity there. And I think that variety and diversity is, and that perspective is carried through in my research trajectory. And so I just wanted to take a moment to think about that with you today. But why are we here? And what are we going to talk about? And so we recognize that we are a nation of forests. Canada has a huge forest land base dominated by the boreal forest, but also there's diversity across that with stands of different types. So that is a part of our land base, and the forests provide a wide range of societal benefits. I mean, as forest practitioners and people on the call, I'm sure you know this better than I. There's a wide range of benefits from the forest. We've got the social aspects, recreation, health, spirituality, food, shelter, environmental, climate regulation, water flow, clean air, biodiversity, and also the economic side, tourism, employment, products, and trade. So there's a lot of different aspects to forestry. But despite this, or just another layer of thinking about it, is that the forests are under a lot of pressures. And so we have natural disturbances, wildfires, flooding, windstorms, droughts, insects, and the frequency and the strength are changing in part due to climate change. And then we also have anthropogenic disturbances, so cumulative effects, natural resource extraction, land use conversion, agriculture. All of this is influencing the forests, and they're under a significant amount of pressure. So that's sort of perspective, perhaps locally, when I talk about our regions and what do we think of as forestry, sort of a national context. But the impetus for this research and what is going on, the why, is bigger than that. It's at an international level. And so the EUDR is a regulation in place from the European Union related to forest degradation, deforestation, imports and exports of forest-related goods must be restricted from areas that aren't deforested or degraded. And so this is driving the research in my area. And so there's this conversation about what forest degradation is at an international level as well as national. But the conversation is also on other things. There's also this really big demand for soil data and indicators. The EU put forward a soil strategy in 2021. They're looking at reaping the benefits of healthy soils for people, food, nature, and climate. This past fall, they passed the soil monitoring law. So how are they going to measure and report the condition of soil within the European Union? So there's this really big interest in soil data and indicators within the European Union. But it also extends outside of the European Union. It's a global conversation and topic of interest. Australia in 2021 put forward a national soil strategy. In 2024, Senator Rob Black led a committee and reported Critical Ground, and it's a report on the state of soil within Canada. The QR code here, if you're interested, links to the report itself. And what, to me, as a soil scientist who's worked in a number of different systems, what I appreciate about the report is the mention of agricultural soils, forest soils, and the recognition that there's a diversity across the country. And so there's the report within Canada, but there's also other motions or other conversations happening at the national level. In 2021, a private members bill within the House of Commons, an act respecting soil conservation and soil health, was put forward. It didn't move along, but it does indicate an interest in soil and soil health. Senator Black is now leading a bill in the Senate of Canada, an act respecting the development of a national strategy for soil health, protection, conservation, and enhancement. And the Soil Conservation Council of Canada is working towards a national soil health strategy. So to say that at multiple levels, there's this conversation, a dialogue, and interest in soil data and indicators and forest degradation. So these are big ideas, these are big concepts, and being trained in the academic sense, you got to talk about the definitions. And so I'll start with forest degradation. And so the EU put forward forest degradation as structural changes to forest cover, taking the form of conversion of primary forests or naturally regenerating forests into plantation forests or other wooded land or planted forests. The CCFM here in Canada has currently defined it as direct human impacts to forest landscapes, which result in an enduring reduction or reduced capacity to provide ecosystem services. So the concept here, as I interpret it, is a loss. There's sort of a loss in something in ecosystem services. They're not operating or providing what you would expect. Then there's also the idea of soil health. And so again, as with forest degradation, it's not one unifying clear definition. Henry Jensen has put forward a definition which I appreciate: the vitality of a soil in sustaining the socio-ecological functions of its enfolding land. I appreciate it for recognizing the importance of place and the interpretation based on where you are. The National Resources Conservation Service and the Soil Health Institute both use the capacity of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And so whereas degradation was this loss in ecosystem services, the sense there, soil health is to function well, a positive, an increase in something. So when I think of them, I sort of think of them as opposite ends. They're the antithesis of each other. Forest degradation on one side, soil health kind of concept on the other. So sort of the way I view them and have talked about them. The third concept within the title is soil security. And McBratney put forward the definition that's sort of a working one right now. I also, as with the others, I don't think there's a unifying definition. He talks about it as the maintenance improvements of the world's soil resources to produce food, fiber, and fresh water, and to contribute to energy and climate sustainability and maintain the biodiversity and overall protection of the ecosystem. And when McBratney and others talk about it, they put forward there's 5 dimensions. There's capability, condition, capital, connectivity, and codification. And so the capability is what can the soil do? The condition is the idea of where it's at now. Capital is more like the value that it might have, connectivity, education, and understanding. And codification is sort of the rules, regulations, policy surrounding the soil. And so the idea with this one is really to move soil security to the idea of accessing soil ecosystem services on the same level as other human rights, such as air and water. So it's a really big picture idea, but a little bit more on the what. So we're talking about national and international conversations and these big concepts. And I just want to touch a bit about soil. It's hard to know sometimes when I give the talks outside the soil science fields, like if somebody's heard of it before or how much. I suspect you have as forest practitioners, but I just wanted to take a couple of slides to highlight soil and sort of how we talk about it within the field. And as with the forests, they provide many functions, but my bias as a soil scientist is I don't think we'll have forests if we didn't have soils. Because they provision the food, fuel, and fiber. There's carbon sequestration, nutrient cycling, habitat, flood regulation, foundation for infrastructure, cultural heritage. So Soil has a role in many different areas, and I just wanted to highlight that with you. But sort of what is it and how do you get it? And when we talk about soil, we talk about the five soil forming factors: climate, organisms, relief, parent material, and time. And so the five interact to create the soil that you come across and you observe. And it was really cool. A number of years ago, I was able to be part of a project that looked at the development of soil at a glacial retreat. And it was a really beautiful illustration of the development of soil. At the toe of the glacier, you have this exposed parent material. And as you move away from that, and it's a surrogate for time, you have the development of soil in a forest floor, as shown here. So that's sort of the different interacting components that come into play with soil. And I just wanted to highlight that with you. And so when we're talking about degradation, we're talking about soil health, and people want to get into reporting. What do you report? Oh, what do you say? And then so people start talking about indicators. And I work with a couple of graduate students, and I want to make the case here and give this definition because I've worked in this space probably almost 20 years, and I've been thinking about it. And it's pretty, there's a distinction between the two, a measurement and an indicator. All indicators are measurements, but not all measurements are indicators. And I've started taking the time to work through this with them. And I came across this definition, which I wanted to share with you. As an indicator can be defined as a means of obtaining and communicating information about an object or phenomenon of interest, and it differs from the mere measurement of a parameter because of the meaning given to it in relation to the object. And so I want to highlight that idea. It's the meaning. The meaning that you give the measurement makes it the indicator. And so, yeah, that's an overarching influence in how you talk about measurements in soil. Yeah, just something that it's a subtlety that I wanted to highlight. As I said, I've been working in the space for a while and thinking about and writing about measurements and indicators. And in some talks recently, I was trying to synthesize these different ideas and pull them together on, what might make a useful indicator. And I came up with this graphic, because these are the sort of the 6 things that I think are really important in saying that an indicator is any good. And so one is measuring capacity. And so for soils, and certainly the space that I occupy, we do a lot of direct measurements, physical measurements. And so does the lab or your lab or whomever have the space and the ability to do this measurement? Do you have the budget for it? I mean, I think that influences your overall choice of an indicator. pH, texture, total carbon, pretty common, pretty easy to do. But if you get into isotopic analysis, I mean, that one gets really right at your question, but it's advanced instrumentation. It's really expensive to do. Genomics as well. That side of things can get more complicated. So that's part of the influence and what you're interested in, what your questions are, if it's a good indicator or not. Within the field, we also talk about methodology. We need to have consistent laboratory methodology, that my lab is measuring pH the same way as your lab and our neighbor's lab, just to be able to compare the results. If you've stepped into the soil science realm, you know that just talking about how to measure pH can create a lively dialogue. So when we get into indicators and talking about it on a broader scale, we need to understand the methodology behind it and how we're taking these results. Then there's databases, data availability, pulling everything together, and being able to archive your information. I think that's really key in the whole conversation around indicators. Language. We need to have a clear, common, standard language. I've certainly been in meetings where you're talking across fields, and one word used in my field might be different in another. And then your message might get lost or confused. And so it's something that we need to recognize. We need to be clear and we need to have a common language when we're working on these complicated, big problems. There's the idea of a reference state. So what is our target? What is best? And what are you comparing your indicator to, the optimum? And then also that idea of values. What is the meaning that you're putting to it? Maybe there's more. Maybe I've added too many. I welcome your thoughts on this to try to convey the ideas of how to come up with an indicator. Why might an indicator be good for you or me or somebody else? So those are the ideas that have been floating around kind of in my head for the last number of years, and where it brought me to about 2 years ago when we started this project. And I just want to add another sort of caveat to this. This is my story, and this is how I got to this project. This project, I'm really delighted to be working with Jerome Lagunière, David Perret, and Kara Webster. I suspect that if they were to talk about our project, the lead up would be different, but we're all bringing our own perspectives, right? And like how we view the forest, how we view how we get here, and what's driving us to do this research. And so this is my story to get here and the things that I've been thinking about in terms of forest soil data and indicators. And so 2 years ago, we got CFS funding to explore soil data and indicators. And so within that, we sort of had 5 components that we were looking at. We're looking at data. And so we wanted to do a review. We wanted to talk a little bit about data quality, data gathering, and then the database. And then also the idea of measurements and indicators. So the first one, the review, Florian Jordan has led this, and he's looked at how Canada's forest soils are affected by global soil threats. And so the Food and Agriculture Organization has identified 8 soil threats. And this is out in their status of the world soils. It's out, they said in 2025, but they did a presentation and release in the fall and identified these 8, but they hasn't been quite published yet. So there's a disconnect in timing, but certainly they recognize 8 threats and keep an eye out for the new report. And so these threats are linked to what we're interested in soils and how they connect to the ecosystem services. And so Florian did a review of the current literature in relation to the soil threats within Canada's forests. And so he also documented indicators that have been reported as useful within the Canadian context, within the temperate and boreal forests. And so he's noted there's a key challenge in the disconnect between monitoring and the threat timescales. And another note as well is there's critical data gaps that exist from the northern forest regions. And so he's polishing this, and we're expecting it out for peer review at any moment. So you can expect, if you're really interested in this, hopefully within the year, it'll be out and published. So that was just to get a sense of sort of what has happened before us and where is the field in terms of talking about indicators and soil threats to Canada's forests. We also chose to go after a little bit on the idea of language and methodology. And so this side of it was led by David Perret and Kara Webster. And the QR codes here link to the first 2 booklets. And so what we've done here is we are looking at creating booklets and this really practical guidance for sampling forest soils. We're small fields, and I don't know. For me, when I entered, I found it challenging at times to find information and just a little bit more on the how-to. And And so that's what I like about these. They're really simple guides on things to think about when you're working with forest soils and then when you're going out to collect them. Um, and so we have the overview, the first booklet. The second one is a bit more detailed into going to collect the forest soil samples. The third booklet is just, oh, it's going to be hot off the press any moment. And it's a guide to preparing for bulk density and chemical analysis, some of the really common measurements for forest soils. And I can say that it's hard to say where to put the fourth one, forest soil data stewardship. Do I put it in, we're there or not quite? It's in layout right now. So again, we expect that one within the year to be out and available. I appreciate this one too, and I'll give it to you as a teaser. It, it, how do you work with the data? What are you thinking about? And if you want your project to integrate with other projects to form a larger data set, what should you be thinking about? What you should be collecting? But even just more on your own scale, as I said, it was challenging for me at the time when I started, or it can still be. What data do I want to collect? How do I want to collect it? How do I want to manage this data? And so it's not part of the curriculum for me in thinking about data management and data stewardship. So I really appreciate the efforts that have gone in to produce this booklet to provide guidance around that. And then the next one that we're aiming towards is for digital soil mapping, because that's a really also important part of working with soil data in forest ecosystems. So that was a little bit about, what data is there and guiding the quality. But the big thrust of this project was, could we build an architecture, a framework for a forest soil database? And so that's really getting the idea of databases and data availability. Can we pull different projects together? And so again, my story, my perspective. And so for me, as I said, I'm trained in the academic setting, been doing it for a while, and I've had a number of different projects where you're thinking about, what's going on with the soil, how is it happening, why is it happening, and so you have these disparate soil projects. Super fun, super great. And so I'm here in my little silo, working with a few collaborators, exploring these ideas of soil. But I also know that there are people over there who are talking data, and they're working over there. But I'm focused on my questions. But I would also say in the last while, the murmurs that have once been there are getting to roars. In my perspective, there's really hungry for data, and we're in a big data era. And so I recognize this. People want more details around soils. And so again, back to my perspective and how I'm being driven on this project, this recognition of this request for data, because my perspective is that I'm in my silo. I'm asking my question. I go out and I collect my soil sample. I hopefully get a paper out of it. And if you know me and you come across the paper, any of that, it's a free little library and you might get this one little data set, which is pretty cool. But if you're interested in doing a meta-analysis or a synthesis, you need to go and find all these different free little libraries to pull it together. And so the idea for me is to address this roar for data from other people interested in soil is, can we build a forest soil database? Can we combine all the free little libraries, make them interconnected and indexed in some way so that you can access all of this research results? Because I suspect as forest practitioners, you'll know that there's a lot of effort in this, in going to the field. There's so much work there and so much effort, physical effort, to be able to collect samples, to be able to collect the data. And then there's also a lot of money that's been spent to be able to go to the field and collect it. And then For me and my samples, there's also a lot of money spent on the analysis. There's a lot of investment on these databases. So can we leverage this, increase the value by pulling the data sets together? And so that's what's driven me and my interest on this project. In talking with my colleague who's leading it, we were trying to come up with graphics. He had to create different perspective. And saying for sure there's this increasing demand to say that your data sets are open. And so the visual representation I quite like here, where there's a number of different places perhaps you could put your data now, and your project results and pull them out. But it's chaotic. The web is chaos out there. So another way of thinking about it is, can we make it easier? Can we make it a single portal that allows people to access forest soil data? And so that's what we were after here on this project. We were pulling together just a limited number of forest soil data sets. And then can we prove the concept? Can we build a database architecture? And so this is outside my area. I'm really excited to be part of it, but the details are, I can try and answer questions, but I'll probably likely pass them off to Caitlin Dallaire and Xavier Mallet, who are the two leads on this project. And so for this project, as I said, we identified a limited number of forest soil data sets, detailed the specifics of them. They developed a forest soil data model. They constructed a pipeline and have looked at the preliminary sort of idea or foundation for a data portal. So the challenge in this is complicated, but Xavier made this slide, and I really like it because I think also, as you know, forest systems are messy, complicated. Those aren't kind words. They're really interesting and they're diverse. And so thinking about that, for the CFS, we have research forests, Acadia, or Petawawa, perhaps. And what you have are these established locations, multi-year, and you have a variety of different projects, perhaps A or B shown here. And they go across multiple years, but they also overlap in space. Maybe you've got some sites within that, and you can sample them every year. You can sample them alternate years, depending on funding levels. Maybe you sample by horizon, maybe you sample by depth. So it gets pretty complicated when you're talking about forest soil research data. And so in addition to that, we're also, certainly myself, I'll take above ground measurements. So it's not just soil, that I'm interested in other data, other metadata around that when I go to interpret the results. And so it gets quite messy. And I just want to highlight this because this was a big challenge for Caitlin and for Xavier in creating the database. There is another National Soil Database Initiative. It's being led out of Dalhousie, but it doesn't have quite the same, they're not addressing the same level of complexity. The focus is on agriculture, and it's a little bit more streamlined in how they're looking at it. We're in direct talks. Everything we anticipate will work together, so you can play with the two data sets together. But with this one, we're just trying to pull in as much information as possible to support any possible question later. We want to keep all this amazing effort and value in the data. And so Xavier and Caitlin worked on this. They developed a standard data model. They are using the PostSQL open source object relational database management with the Open Geospatial Consortium Topic 20 observations, measurement, samples. And it's modified to include the ontology from ISO 28258 to handle profiles and horizon observations. Again, I can try and answer questions, or there's Caitlin and Xavier's emails are here too if you want to know more about it. I really appreciate the flexibility that's been built into it. And I think sometimes they'll correct me later, but I think I've talked about it as, to me, it's a bit like a dust bunny in that you have this piece of data, you have your result, but it's interconnected to all the other bits of information that you have. Um, tree results, and locations, perhaps weather. And so I'll just say it's not an Excel spreadsheet. It's not a two-dimensional database, which is what I would usually work with in my tiny little data sets for my free little library. This is building a much more complex model that allows this diversity and variety. And so it's pretty exciting. They've got numerous results within from this limited data set with lots of features and interests. And so really where we're at is that they've proved the concept. We were able to have them work on this for just over a year, and they've been able to take it to this stage, which is really exciting. And I'm also excited that the funding is continuing and that they'll be working on it for another 2 to 3 to increase the data that we're able to get into the database, but then also start using the database and seeing what can we get out of it and start answering questions on the other side. So that was on sort of the data side of this project. We also have the other side, which is measurements and indicators. And so this one is getting the idea of methodology and a reference state when we're thinking about it that way. And so this one is linked to an NSERC Alliance Society grant. It's being led by Sylvie Kido out of the University of Alberta, and it's a national network of academic, federal, provincial researchers. We've identified 17 long-term research sites from across the country, and we've got common tree types that are linked. There's common themes of soil type and disturbance in these stands. And so with these, what we have is this paired idea at all 17. We've got this perhaps a reference state or a control kind of idea in a mature stand. And we're comparing disturbed stands to that. And the disturbance, we tried to have a harvest at each location. And then maybe something else, a wildfire or salvage logging disturbance of the stand. So we had a standardized field collection and we have centralized laboratory analysis. So those two ideas are trying to remove some of the noise that you might get in data. If you send out multiple field teams, maybe slightly different protocols, things will go a little bit different. So we tried to standardize that as much as possible. Same with the lab analysis. We're trying to have all analyses for one particular measurement done in one lab to remove that potential variation. And so through that, I'm trying to hope that we get some signal from the noise to be able to find some common measurements that might be indicators of change in all these different stand types. And so for this case, that's pretty common measurements of soil. We're talking about bulk density, porosity, looking at chemical properties, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, cation exchange, pH, EC. And so can any of these be clear indicators of difference across all these different stands? So that's one side of the project within the Why Soils Matter. But there's also a second side, which is really being led by the Alliance team. And that's getting at the idea of carbon and carbon under Canadian forests. And so as we saw, carbon sequestration, really important soil function, ecosystem service. We know it's really a key component to soils, but forest soil carbon isn't well understood. So this is what we're trying to get at. What influences soil carbon persistence in Canada's forest soils? And then can we improve the quantification and characterization of soil carbon persistence? And so with this networks of sites, we've got targeting like the stand type, we've got these common ones. And then also looking at soil types, and the overarching influence of disturbance and climate in terms of changes within the carbon pools. So they'll be measured in different ways, and then also getting at the idea of biodiversity and composition, because we know those are really important in terms of understanding carbon persistence. So this is where it gets into really in-depth detailed measurements on this side of the project. And so beyond your total carbon and nitrogen concentration, you're getting into physical fractionations, the mom and the palm, lab incubations, biomarkers of the plants themselves through high GCMS or NMR, isotopic composition, IRMS, getting into the biodiversity through PLFA analysis, genomic and enzyme analysis. So really getting into the finer details and trying to understand overall carbon pools, and then also how the differences in biodiversity or carbon composition might be influencing carbon persistence. And so we've got, I think, about 5 graduate students who are on this project, and they are just starting. So I expect it'll ramp up pretty quickly, and the results on this will come probably in the next 2 to 5 years. So keep an eye out on that. But what's really cool about this project as well is we have Sophia Cardenudo. She is a professor at the University of Victoria. Her expertise is in environmental governance. And so what she's looking at within this project is this overarching objective to generate policy relevant knowledge to effectively integrate forest soil carbon in Canadian climate policies, and to look at the extent with which forest soils and forest soil carbon have been taken into consideration and identify these entry points that become policy levers to target in the next phase of research. So, but yeah, it's really exciting to be working with this other perspective on soil and getting into sort of the codification idea of soil security, the public policy and the regulation aspect of it. And so that was in the idea of measurements and indicators and sort of common measurements. But we also have the idea of measurements, measuring capacity. And so Maisie has led this side of it, and this is in new measurements. And she led a review looking at how remote sensing is used in forest soil monitoring. And she wanted to clarify how the technology was used with strengths and with limitations. And she has found that wildfire and harvesting are the 2 dominant disturbance types where it's used, and that they use different tools. The wildfire uses the multispectral satellite imagery, and harvesting uses the LIDAR. So wildfire for burn severity, sort of erosion risk, and then harvesting is surface deformation and rutting. So what she finds is that the new measurements can be effective for disturbance mapping and surface change rather than direct quantification. And again, this is a review. We have the manuscript. It's just undergoing final polish, and I suspect it will be submitted to a journal shortly. So again, look for the results in the coming year. And so, yeah, it's a lot of big ideas, and just how they fit together. And so, recognizing this, it's like, oh, we came up with the title a long time ago, and I'm going, when I was looking at it recently, I'm like, this isn't the right title. Insights to me indicates we're going to have results, and we're not there yet. But it's perspectives. And trying to understand and talk about, how do we come together when we talk about soil? And so I'd forgotten the introduction that I'd given to Sharon at the beginning, and sprinkled throughout, I was reminded, I talk about soil health in my history. I talk about soil quality. You could also hear about soil fertility, the two drivers here, forest degradation and soil health. and that soil is really important and they provide a number of ecosystem services. But I think soil security is the umbrella that links everything together. And so it's I just want to highlight that because soil health is a buzzword that is out there, and it has really captured interest, and it is driving a lot of conversation around soil, which is great. Uh, but it's also caught in the agricultural world. It does come into play sometimes in the forestry context, but generally speaking, when people talk about soil health, it's coming from this ag perspective, this assumption and sense that it's coming from there. Forest degradation, implied by the term with forestry in there, it's coming from a different direction. But I kind of think they're the same thing. You're looking at the condition. What is the soil at now? And that's one of the 5 ideas within soil security. What's the condition of it? And so I think my aim and what I'm exploring is how do we talk about it at a broad level? I mean, I will advocate for soil as sustaining life on Earth. And so how do we get it to this place where we talk about it on the same level as other human rights, such as air and water? Yeah. And so I just sort of that's how I link the ideas of forest degradation, soil health, and soil security. And so, again, I must acknowledge throughout this project, it's been wonderful to work with Jerome Lagunière, David Perret, and Kara Webster, and we've had a national team, which is really exciting. We've got multiple centers in Canada, and we have representatives from each one working on the project. So really taking and integrating all these different perspectives, which has been wonderful. And so, yeah, that is sort of my talk. Thank you, Sharon. And that's where I am with linking for soil degradation, soil health, soil security.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for the great presentation. We'll now move into the Q&A portion of the session. What do you think is one misconception people often have about forest soils?
Oh, I think a common misconception was they don't often think that they're there. I don't know that people often even think of forest soils. I think that would be the one. And then second to that would be the discussion that they're same as agricultural soils. And because so much of our research history in soil science in the field is much larger in the agriculture domain, that the complexity and diversity of forest soils is lost. So it's amazing that people would even recognize they're there and that they're diverse and complex. Yeah.
And are there any gaps in current research or monitoring of forest soil health in Canada?
Hmm. I think so. I think it's a newer area and a newer way of thinking about it. And so we're developing. I think as Florian highlighted, northern soils are underrepresented. And so, yeah, we've got work to do there.
And what are some best practices currently being used in Canada to minimize soil disturbances?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not the one for that. I think the people on the call would be much better at knowing that. Um, I'm not a practitioner in that sense. I don't know as much what's happening on the landscape. I know there's amazing work being done, but good question. I apologize. I don't have a clear answer for that.
No worries, I'll save that question. Okay, so here are some questions in the Q&A pod. How we can share soil data with the Canada Forest Soil Database?
Ah, yes. Stay tuned, I think is the answer. Feel free to reach out. My email is on the top of the slide. Catlin is Xavier there too. We are just changing, sort of switching gears, if you want to say, from moving from proof of concept to a little bit bigger. And we're trying to expand what we can take in with the Canadian Forest Service. We want to move into what else the federal government has in terms of forest soil data, and then maybe move beyond that. But we're also really open to conversations on what you have and what's out there. So please reach out. And the goal is to make it easy to do for sure, and to be this great portal of forest soil, an open portal of fair forest soil data.
Thank you, Charlie. Next question for you in the Q&A pod is this work looking at mineral soils only or also considering organic soil, peat?
Oh, no, we're not in the peat world. If we talk about sort of the second half of the talk when I look at measurement, this has been within the managed forest is our target. And what we took in terms of sampling there was forest floor and mineral soil. So these are in stands like that. We did not get into deep organics or peatlands. We made a distinction there. And that's also where we'll make our distinction for the database itself. There are other resources out there that relate to that. So yeah, that's a good question. We're outlining our box within forest soils, the forest floor, mineral soil data and results. Yeah.
Great. Thank you all for participating in our CIF electronic lectures. And once again, thank you very much to Charlotte for the great presentation. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for the opportunity. Bye.
Bye.